Hi, I'm Eva. Welcome to The Charm of It, which is a knitting podcast in which I unpack my basket and talk about what I've been working on, what I finished, and various knitting related topics. This is my co-host Moth and my other co-host Thistle, who consider podcast recording time prime lap time. So thank you for returning or trying me out for the first time. I really appreciate everyone's support. If you would like to contact me, I am on Ravelry as The Charm of It. There's also a group for the podcast, and I am on Instagram as The Charm of It. So I love interacting with viewers. That's why I started the podcast. So feel free. I know that I'm behind on PMs on Ravelry. It's because my hips were really messed up for a few days, so I couldn't really sit at my computer. And so, yeah, that's why I'm behind. But I've caught up on the messages on the board, and I will be going through PMs very soon. First up, I would say, is going to be the draw for the Knit Picks Felici yarn in the gummy bear color that was a giveaway. And I started a thread, and all you had to do was tell me a New Year's resolution to be entered. So I did random number generator, and we had 59 entrants. So I did 2 through 60 because I did the first thread. And the winner was Thread Wench. That's her Ravelry name. Her actual name is Vicky. And her, there it is. Her New Year's resolution is to work more with animals at her local APL, that's Animal Protection League, in case you could call it something different in your country. And then she also wants to master brioche knitting. So those are some very fabulous resolutions, of course, and I hope that you enjoy the Knit Picks yarn. I will either PM you, or if you watch this and you haven't received a message yet, PM me so that I can get your address and get that in the mail at some point. She's got a great owl profile photo as well. Thanks to everyone who told me about their New Year's resolutions in order to enter. I wish that I could give you all yarn, And I'm drinking chai today. I ran out of my hot chocolate paste, so I decided to make some chai instead. Let's see. For the question, I'm going to do that as the topic this week, which is going to be about reading and knitting and how to combine the two. So I thought for a tip, I would just mention my favorite tubular cast-on because I use the tubular cast-on a lot. And the method I do doesn't seem fiddly at all, and I know a lot of people have had issues with it. So just in case this method works for you as well, it's on the Tech Knitters website, and I will link it in the show notes in case you're interested. It works beautifully for 1x1 ribbing. And the other thing I really like about it is that you don't have to measure out yarn like you do for a long tail cast on, and so you don't have that terrible thing where you have to cast on 200 stitches and at like stitch 180 you realize that your long tail is not long enough. I absolutely hate it when that happens. So yes, I will include the link just in case you're interested in trying out a tubular cast on. And then we should move on to finished objects, the first of which Moth is pawing as usual. This is my Castles in the Air shawl. I just did the cast off last night and laid it out to block it, and then thanks to radiators making my apartment really dry, it was dry enough to wear. It turned out gigantic, as you can probably see. Hang on, I'll take it off. I did not have time to weave in the ends. Oh, sorry, sweetie. So, apologies for the dangly ends, but you don't see them when I'm wearing it, so I thought I would just go ahead. Ooh, okay. So, here we go. There is the lace nice and blocked. I'm very new to blocking shawls and lace knitting, so hopefully I didn't do too badly. The curves are definitely not completely even. Blocking is really hard on me. My arthritis does not like kneeling on floors or bending over, so precision blocking is never going to be my forte, but I really love how it turned out. It's so sparkly with the beads, and they give it a nice heft. However, I was a little taken aback by how big it is. You're not going to be able to tell, but basically it's a little longer than I am tall, and I'm 5'3", so 63 inches. There's the focus. And let's see, what is that in centimeters? Around 160 centimeters. So it's a little longer than that. And then once I blocked it, I didn't block the body aggressively at all because I like that it stayed soft and squishy. I blocked the lace just so that, you know, it would open up. I know, Moth, sweetie. Moth feels that all the attention should be on her, not the camera. Anyway, so I blocked the lace so that it would open up, and as you can see, that ended up doing reasonably long in the middle where it's longest, and then even on the ends, it's still quite wide, I guess, not long. I'll measure it and put that in my project notes in case you're curious, because I did. My apologies for the abrupt transition. My camera battery ran out of power. I do have another battery, and I thought it was fully charged, but it turns out it's not. I think because my apartment stays fairly chilly during the winter, and I know that that can drain batteries more quickly. But hopefully it'll let me do the podcast. I took advantage of the break to go ahead and measure, and at its widest point it is 15 inches or 38 centimeters. And then the little pointy blocked tips add another inch or 2.5 centimeters. So it's a very large shawl. And I was a little concerned that I wasn't going to be able to style it. I mean, I love Jenny of the Tiny Paper Foxes podcast. She wears giant shawls, but I was a little intimidated. So I just decided to throw it on and see what would happen. And the way that I have it done, obviously I did this while the camera was off again, is I have it so that the points go in 2 layers. Do let me know if you think it looks okay. And I'm just wearing it with a silk blouse and then skinny jeans, corduroys. Because I love corduroy and it's winter, so I can wear it as much as I want. So let me know if you think it looks okay. I could also style it like that, but that just seemed to make my head look very small, hence I pushed it in a little. I'm very new to wearing shawls, but I had such a good time knitting this, and I think it's so pretty, so hopefully I'll figure out how to wear it. At least now I know that with sport weight shawls, because I held this yarn double to get a sport weight, I don't actually need to make them gigantic. I was so paranoid it would end up too small like my teal scarf did. So I guess I erred on the side of too large, but hey, still learning. Sweaters seem like a much easier category to master than neckwear, but maybe that's just me. And this yarn is Quince & Company's Piper, which is a single ply, heavy lace weight, 50% Texan merino, 50% Texan mohair yarn that I love. I held it doubled, as I mentioned, and the pattern is Mustard Seed by Boo Knits, which was a paid-for pattern, and I think it was definitely worth it. The pattern was laid out beautifully. It was fully charted and also written, for those of you who don't like charts, and it included suggestions for cast-ons and bind-offs. I did the suspended bind-off that she suggested, which I'd never done before, and I was amazed at how quick it was for a stretchy bind-off, so I'm very pleased about that. And yeah, I would definitely buy more of her patterns. I think she has a beautiful sensibility. I really like the kinds of shawls that she designs, and then clearly her patterns are really well done. I can't afford to spend $6 to $8 on a pattern for every single thing that I knit, but the next time that I need a special project, I will definitely look at her stuff. And let's see, I actually have a lot of finished objects this week. I was doing really well with my slow knitting. I wasn't knitting more than maybe 2 hours a day, which was my little self-imposed limit to be slower about things. And then Friday night and yesterday, Saturday, because I'm starting to record on Sundays now. Anyway, I broke that. I was still trying to help my hip feel better, and so I had a lot of couch time, and I read quite a bit, but then I got really into a TV show on Netflix. Sorry, they're like 4 squirrels playing outside my window. I don't know what they're doing. And then I had a really good audiobook going, so I ended up knitting more than I should have. So I will be getting back into slow knitting, but in the meantime, I do have some finished objects. First up are my folksy leg warmers. which I think I was almost done with. I just had the ribbing left to do last time. So I knit that up and then I blocked them. And then yesterday I wore them for the first time and they are so functional. I really love them. This is the Cloudy Days pattern. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. I added leg shaping though because my calves are significantly larger than my ankles. And I think I did more ribbing at the top too because I wanted to be able to double it over, so I just did 2x2 ribbing. You can find all the details on my pattern page. I'm trying really hard to make sure I take good notes now that I podcast. I used to take really good notes when I first started knitting, and then that just kind of got away from me. So these are out of Elsa wool, which is 100% Cormo from a small business in the US, and Cormo is the most delicious yarn. And this is her worsted spun sport weight. And I meant to bring over the sweater I've made out of her woolen spun with the same color so that you could see the difference, but I forgot. So I'll try to do that on a future episode. But it's really interesting to see how the worsted spun versus woolen spun yarn knits up. I believe this is the medium gray. She only sells natural sheepy colors. And yeah, I was super pleased at how functional they were. Someone, I can't remember who, asked me if I had any experience with whether they would stay up or not. And after yesterday, I can report I wore them over tights when I was outside, and they stayed up really well. Inside, I wore them over my bare legs, and they slouched a little, but not super slouchy, just a bit slouchy. So I was really happy with how they looked both ways. And I suspect that there are more leg warmers in my future. Another finished object that I finished early in the week was the hand warmer I was making for my great-great-aunt, who is a nun, who is now retired. She's not retired from being a nun, but, you know, she doesn't work anymore because she is 96, 97, somewhere in there. Her name is Sister Grace, and she lives in Buffalo. And I got to meet her for the first time last summer, and we had a great time talking, and I had happened to be bringing a shawl, also out of Elsa wool Cormo, that I was knitting, and she fell in love with it, so I ended up giving her that. And while we were there, she was playing with the yarn cake a lot and mentioned that her hands are always cold, so I decided to make her a Thrummed muff, like, you know, a tube, to keep her hands warm. She still does rosary beads. She makes rosaries. And so I thought that that would be the easiest way for her to be able to pop her hands in and out. So when I was visiting down with Christmas, my mom paid for the yarn and fiber because it's her great aunt. And I went ahead and knit that up, and I decided to mail it right away because I happened to be running errands close to the post office that day, and it's winter, and she's 97. So I figured every day would matter. That sounds terrible, but you know what I mean. So I'll insert a couple photos here. I really like how it turned out. I used Barocco Kodiak for the yarn, which is in a baby alpaca nylon chunky weight yarn. I'd never knit with chunky weight before, but turns out it knits up very quickly. And I used one entire skein. I used up the last few yards crocheting a chain so that she can wear it around her neck. And for the fiber, I used about 1 ounce of 100% merino fiber roving. I'm not really sure what the different types of fiber are called. But yeah, we bought 4 ounces because I asked the yarn store worker how much she would suggest, and she suggested that we double whatever the mitten pattern was, and Thrummed mittens seemed to call for 2 ounces. So clearly that was overkill. But that's okay, because that means I can make some Thrummed things, and I do actually own a drop spindle. I have not spun on it for quite a while, but it's always there. So I'm sure that I will make good use of the 3 more ounces of fiber, and my mom doesn't mind. Mary asked if I would talk a little more about Sister Grace, and I will happily do that just as soon as I start the next clip. So as I mentioned, Sister Grace is retired. She became a nun when she was 18, and she said that she knew she wanted to be a nun from the time she was 10 or 11. She was the baby of her family by quite a big margin, so even though she's my grandmother's aunt, They're only about 15 years apart in age. And my grandmother is also the baby of her family. So, yeah. Anyway, and so she worked as a teacher. That was her job. And she worked with mentally disabled children in the 50s and 60s when a lot of them were still in institutions. And then later she ended up working in prisons. And that's where she was working right up until her 80s when she finally couldn't drive anymore. And so she had to retire. And now she is in a nursing home that is for nuns. I believe it's of her order. It's St. Joseph, I believe. And so she still makes rosaries. She orders the beads, and then she assembles the rosaries and then sends them off to various Catholic missionaries. So, and she's in her 90s, and so, her body is a bit frail, but her mind is completely there. So she's really fun to talk to. She has lots of funny stories because, of course, she grew up quite early in the 20th century on a farm in upstate New York. So there's lots of funny stories about the animals and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to seeing her again next summer, and we correspond by letter. She is pretty much blind at this point, so someone reads the letters to her and then someone writes her replies. And hopefully we'll start talking by phone soon. But yeah, so that is Sister Grace. And I hope that her hands are nice and warm by now. I mailed it out on Tuesday, and I live very close to Buffalo, so should have gotten there quickly. My final finished object are my Lomy Field socks, which I just finished last night as well. I had like a finishing party. Do you get like that where once a project is like 85-90% finished, you just want to finish it, even when you're trying to be a slow knitter? Anyway, so the ends are also not woven in on these yet, but this is the Artichokes pattern, which is a free pattern on Ravelry, and I really like how it knit up. I made a few modifications, which you can read about on my pattern page. And then I also used a chart that another Ravelry member created, which you can find linked on my project page because the pattern doesn't include a chart, and I would like charts. This yarn is Hawthorn Kettle Dye from Knit Picks in the Fawn colorway. It's a really pretty brown variation. And I think it knit up pretty well. There was a bit of pooling on the second sock when I had to gusset, but not too bad. I must admit, I didn't terribly enjoy knitting with Hawthorn. Some superwash yarns feel very plasticky to me, and this one felt a little plasticky, so I'm not sure that I'll be buying any more Hawthorn to knit with, because I had the same experience with the Hawthorn speckle that I used to knit a squirrel for my niece. And it's not all superwash yarns. Like, I love the Cascade Heritage Silk. But yeah, but I'm very pleased with the socks, and I'm sure that they'll wear really nicely. Brown socks are very practical because I have a lot of brown shoes. Hopefully you can't hear my neighbors chatting in the hallway right now. And they look much better when they're on, but I don't own sock blockers because I don't block socks. I just wash them and hang them over a hanger to dry. But, oh, come on. There we go. I really like how the pattern knit up, and I could see using it again because it was a really good combination of interesting enough to not get boring, but really easy to memorize and just relaxing to knit. My battery is blinking at me again. So now we will move on to this week's topic. I took notes this time, and I have the notes next to me. So of course I forgot to charge my battery. Okay, so this was suggested by two of the group members, Inez versus the wool. Sorry, Thistle was trying to rearrange herself, and Moth had a panic that she was about to be laid on by a dog, even though she lays on Thistle all the time. Okay, so Inez versus the wool and Knockout Kyla, who are Inez and Kyla. And they're both curious about how to combine reading and knitting as hobbies. So Inez's questions were, how do I split my time? and what kinds of projects do I find most suited to audiobooks and then just regular books. So I also struggle with splitting my time between knitting and reading. I've been a bookworm my entire life, and so before I began knitting, that was pretty much all my free time. I read 300 to 400 books a year, and I blogged about them. And then knitting happened, and I got a little obsessed with knitting, and it really cut into my reading time, and it was kind of concerning me, especially last year. So that's part of why I want to knit more slowly and knit for fewer hours, is because I want to be able to spend more time with physical books. So I guess my way of balancing it, I have the kind of personality that when I get really interested in something new, I research it, and it's like all I think about and all I want to do. So just for, the first 2.5 years that I was knitting, I just kind of accepted that I was going to get more and more. Apologies again for another abrupt transition. I have 2 batteries for my camera, so right now I'm alternating between them and hoping that they get charged enough in the meantime to last. As I was saying, so I just kind of, and I wasn't obsessed with knitting from the very beginning. I'm sorry, I'm fixing my heating pad since I had to get up. Okay, we'll stop squirming now. So I would say the last year is really when I got really focused on knitting, and I just kind of accepted that knitting was going to occupy more of my time for a little bit because they're my hobbies, right? So I'm just doing them because I love them and I'm interested in them, so there's no point in forcing a balance if I don't feel like being balanced. But now I've kind of indulged my knitting full as much as I want to, and I've kind of gotten back to a state where I'm as interested in reading as I am with knitting again. And so the way that I guess I balance them is to just do whatever I feel like doing, and now I have a more balanced interest. So I guess I don't have much advice to offer there, but I do have advice as to what kind of projects. So for me, I knit while I read like actual books, and then I also knit to audiobooks. For me, any project is an audiobook project. I listen to audiobooks while I do a ton of stuff or podcasts, and there are certain projects like Colorwork where I have to be reading the chart all of the time, and those are audiobook only. Like I won't watch TV while I'm doing that or watch video podcasts because I can't look at the screen. When I got up, I think I messed my shawl up. Anyway, so yeah, I would consider any project an audiobook project, and then the ones that require me to be looking at a chart constantly are the ones that I only do to those. And I get all of my audiobooks from the library because it's free, so why wouldn't I? I have found that for me, novels and then history or more personal nonfiction like essays, memoir, travelogues, that kind of thing are the easiest to listen to while knitting, because when I'm listening to science or international relations type nonfiction, then I tend to want to flip back and forth and check the index or the sources a lot more. But other than that, pretty much anything goes for me. As far as knitting while reading actual books, and this ties into Kyla's question too. She's asking if I read and knit at the same time. I do. I'm not doing that as much now because I'm trying to be more mindful about my knitting, and so I like to reserve it for a treat. But I definitely have in the past, especially the last few months, and I'm sure that I will in the future. So as far as how I trained myself to do that, I'm not really sure. I have neck and shoulder pain issues, and my neck and shoulders feel best if I go straight ahead rather than looking down in my lap. So that was probably the incentive for me to learn how to knit without looking. And then once you can knit without looking, it's really easy to read. So for me, the projects that I find easiest to knit while reading are either stockinette, obviously, or something that is a very regular stitch repeat, and so my fingers can just kind of get in the rhythm of it, like 2x2 rib, or maybe 4 rounds of stockinette and then something happens, like the leg warmers. I knit on the leg warmers while I was reading, and that wasn't a problem. So if I were you, I would start with like a plain vanilla sock or something else that's stockinette in the round, and then just practice knitting without looking. I knit both continental and English style without looking when I'm doing stockinette. I would say English style is a little easier because you don't have to find the yarn with your needle the same way, but if you're used to knitting continental, then I'm sure that you've got stockinette down by now. So I guess you can start by just trying a few stitches at a time, and then you'll see that nothing goes wrong, and you'll be able to keep doing it. I will say that for me, my Nook, which is an e-reader, is much easier to read than physical books, just because then I don't have to worry about keeping it open. Unfortunately, my Nook will not turn a page when I touch it with a knitting needle. I keep trying, but it doesn't provide the right force, so I do have to, tap it with a finger. But usually I can just reach and do that while I'm knitting. So e-books are definitely the easiest for me to knit to, but I do knit while reading paper books as well, as long as they can stay open on their own. And yeah, the more you do it, the better you get. So just, I guess, practice. The other thing you could do, and this is how my school taught us to touch type, well, one of the many ways, they were very into teaching us to touch type, but they put like a board or something so that we couldn't see our hands on the keyboard. So you could always sit at a table and knit under the table, and then you wouldn't be able to look either. So yeah, start with something that's really plain stockinette, a hat or a sock or something like that, and go from there. The other question was from Kyla, and it was, do I have any recommendations or favorite books that talk about fiber arts? I have a lot of favorite books. That's what happens when you read a lot and you're very attached to reading. But as far as ones that are fiber arts, there's one that actually I took a class when I got my drop spindle, and my teacher mentioned this book series, so hang on. Sorry, I'm thirsty today. And it is a 4-book fantasy series, but each book stands alone. They pick up one after another, but it's not that situation where you read the first book and it's a total cliffhanger ending and you have to go read the next ones right away. That drives me nuts. But it's by Lois McMaster Bujold, and it's called the Sharing Knife series. The covers are horrendous. I got home from my drop spindle class and I looked up the book and I saw the cover and I almost decided to not read it. So trust me, they're so much better than the cover suggests. And the first chapter or two, I was also a little skeptical. So push through that skepticism and keep going, and they are wonderful books. And they're only a little bit fiber related. The fiber part comes in, this is a fantasy world set in basically 19th century Great Lakes area of the US. And so one of the main characters, whose name is Fawn, she has been raised on a farm. And so, she does all the kind of skills you associate with homesteading in the 19th century, including spinning and knitting. So whenever she's on a journey and she's got some time to fill, she pulls out her spindle or she knits socks and that kind of stuff. So yes, I really love those books. And I thought it would be fun, ever since Kyla asked that question a couple weeks ago, I've been noticing when books mention the fiber arts. And so I thought it might be fun to maybe just share a short segment like mentioning what books have referenced knitting this week that I've read. And so this week, of course, I forgot to bring the book over with me. Luckily, I need to start a new section anyway, so I'm going to disturb Moth and get up and get that. There were actually 3 books for me to talk about this week. The first is The Sleeper and the Spindle by Neil Gaiman, illustrated by Chris Riddle. This is, Neil Gaiman wrote a short novella, long short story adaptation of a couple of fairy tales, and then they released it as a book with Chris Riddle illustrations. It's not quite a graphic novel, it's more like a grown-up picture book, and the illustrations are just beautiful. And obviously the spindle is a nod to Sleeping Beauty. It's on the front and the back, and it definitely plays into the book at some point. So if you're looking for a short, enjoyable read that will have you looking at fairy tales in a new way, and Neil Gaiman is always excellent at creating a wonderful atmosphere. And and that features empowered women characters, then definitely give this one a go. Sorry, that was a kind of loud thump. So the next one is Tempest Rising by Diane McKinney Whetstone. This was my first time reading her. She is an American novelist, and I just really loved it. She managed to write about topics that were dark, a little bit hard, but in a way that still felt cheerful and upbeat, and I would consider her an author to read when I'm in search of a comfort book, even though if you read the plot summary, it might not sound like the most cheerful book, but she did a great job with it. And her narrative voice, she's got that kind of loving storytelling voice that just drew me in from the first page and kept me going. So I'd recommend her in general. And then one of the main characters has, right in the beginning, we learned that she has taken up knitting. So Clarice had her own plan. She'd mentioned to her doctor at her yearly physical that her nerves had been affected by the financial fluctuations in Finch's business. He prescribed Elavil, small doses, and advised Clarice to take up knitting or crocheting or some similarly calming hobby. She did. Would even hum while she knitted, used the finest wools and an inventive knit and purl cross-stitch to weave together all kinds of hats and scarves for the girls. She was quickly approaching the point where she was ready to start showing her work to department stores, maybe bring in enough to buy Shetland and Angoras in bulk, turn enough of a profit to put some black ink onto the pages of Finch's savings account passbook. She was more determined now that she'd buy the wool, work her fingers in fast weaving motions, mix colors like she'd been taught by the uncles, stay strong, straight-backed like she learned from the aunts. So, right in the beginning, we learn that she's knitting, and then there are a couple pivotal scenes that involve knitting, and throughout we follow her daughters and their knitwear, which is very personal and individual since she created her own patterns, plays a role in that as well. So it's just kind of a little thread that's woven through the story, so I thought I'd mention that one. And finally, another graphic novel. This one is closer to graphic novel than illustrated story. It is the Book of Ballads, My Baby, and all the illustrations are by Charles Best, but it's a short story anthology. And the story I want to tell you about is The Great Selkie of Sewell-Skerry by Jane Yolen. All of the stories are adaptations of traditional ballads, and Terry Windling wrote an excellent introduction in case you're interested in that kind of stuff. But so this story is about a young woman who lives on the coast of Scotland in a fishing community in the late 1800s, and she meets a Selkie man, and then she decides to go and be an oyster girl, basically, and travel along the coast working with oysters. And here's the one where it shows that, so just in a little scene, the women, they're all Scottish, and they say, "'Tis hard work, but it seems to agree with you, Marty. You've put on weight, me I'm all skin and bones." And then the other one replies, "That's the lot. We've time for some tea and knitting." So they're knitting. I apologize for slipping into an atrocious accent. I don't know why I did that, but I'm afraid my battery's going to die, so I won't re-record. I think because when I was reading to my niece, I would do lots of different accents, but I'm sorry, especially because I know Claire's watching. I know that didn't sound Scottish. Okay, so those are just my recent fibery knitting books. Let me know if you want me to make that a regular feature as well. I feel like if I have too many regular features, this podcast is never going to end. So maybe I'll alternate knitting and outfits or reading and outfits or something like that. So on to works in progress. I pretty much finished quite a few of my works in progress last night, but I do have 2 other ones to show you. I'll show you the new one first because I already pulled it out. This is, I'm calling it my Red is Blood hat because I've been reading lots of fairy tales lately. And it is based on the Rositude hat from Vintage Modern Knitting, which I remember to bring over, but I've been piling stuff on. So it's out of this book, which I got from the library. It's a fun book. And oh, this is the hat. So it's the Yvette Rossitude hat. There we go. And Rossitude is a style of knitting from Estonia where it lets you work with multiple colors, but it's not stranded color work and it's not intarsia. And my camera is not focusing. Come on. Every once in a while it does this. Let's see. Well, we'll just talk about the hat in the meantime. Apologies for that issue. Instead, what you do is you lay the yarn. Basically, you bring it forward, and then when you've knit however many stitches, you put it in the back. So it's carrying along. And I know that looks a bit sloppy and loose, and it's because I'm going to block this into a beret, so I want to make sure that it's not too tight. And the gray motifs are on two different sides. I probably should have just done two different bobbins, but I didn't feel like it. So next time I would. So this is knit out of the Manos del Uruguay yarn, which I showed you that I bought at my yarn store down in Texas when they were having their sale. And this is the cherry Bing cherry or something colorway. It's a deep, rich red. And it reminds me of the color of blood when you go to the hospital and get your blood drawn. And the vials, hence the name along with the fairy tales. And then, as I mentioned when I was showing you guys that yarn, I bought it in several colors, and I'm trying hard to play more with color this year. So I thought that this hat pattern would be perfect because then I can use the green-pink variegated yarn, which is called Briar Rose, and I love it. And then for this color, I decided to go with a very low contrast look so that it wouldn't detract from the green. So I'm using the leftover brown yarn, the Fiber Company's Road to China Light, which I knit my shawl scarf hybrid out of. And I've got a bit of leftover, so I'm using it. And then the third color, I'm doing the gray that is also the Manos del Uruguay. So that is called Coal, I believe. It's a very blue-gray, and especially in contrast with the red. So I actually misunderstood the directions in the chart. So I had done 16 rounds before I realized that I was doing it wrong. Basically, I was knitting each round twice because of the way I read the directions, and then I glanced at the chart and I saw that only the odd rounds were numbered. So I went, oh, okay, so even numbers aren't shown on the chart and I should just repeat. No. I had to rip it out, but the nice thing is it's just plain stockinette except for the color work. And so I have restarted, and I really like how it's knitting up. I'm very, very pleased with this. The yarn I'm using is a little bit heavier than the yarn that the pattern calls for, which is that Road to China Light. So I adjusted the numbers a little. Basically, I looked at the hat, and I could see that for the decreased crown, they were going to have you do 8 sections of 21 stitches. So I just reduced that to 26, or to 6 sections. So that means I cast on, 126 stitches. And everything else I'll do the same because I'm pretty much getting row gauge. I'm knitting this on size 4, and I'm knitting it English style. I'm a tighter knitter when I knit English style. So very pleased with how that's turning out, and I will show you my other work in progress when I start the next clip. Thistle has decided she wants to be front and center for a little bit. My last work in progress, you saw the beginnings of last week. It is the Colorwork mitt that I am doing for my sister's birthday. This is a paid-for pattern, the Starry Nights mitten pattern, and I'm adapting it to be an elbow-length fingerless mitt instead. So as you can see, it's different on both sides. And I am knitting this, can't remember the yarn. I know it's a Peruvian company, Mirasol, I think, and it's a wool lace combination, or sorry, a wool silk combination that my sister picked out in purple and white. And it's a lace weight, and the pattern is written for fingering and of course for mittens. So I've had to do a little bit of juggling, but I think it's working out really well now. I'm almost to the wrist, at which point I think I'm going to go ahead and do a regular gusset the way I did for my niece's mitts. do the gusset increases right on the side, because that way my sister will be able to wear it reversible with either the swirly side up or the little church side up. There's the church. I'm not sure if you can see it. I think it kind of blends in. It's right here. But hopefully after blocking it'll be a little bit better. This is knitting up into a really nice light fabric that I think will be really helpful, since my sister lives in South Texas, so she's looking more for sun protection and style than actual warmth. Her birthday is February 6th, and this is the 1st, so I'm not sure if I'll be done by her birthday, but if not, I'll be done fairly soon afterwards, and she is very understanding of me. I explained to her that because I have to look at the chart for every row, sometimes my neck and shoulders can't handle that, and she's fine with that. So I'm doing this magic loop. Usually I like to use DPNs, but in the case of Colorwork, I prefer to have as few joints as possible. So I'm magic looping this, and I started on size 2.5, and I've been decreasing, and now I'm down to size 0s. So that's providing the shaping, and then I've got some side stitches that I've been increasing and decreasing. So I'm really pleased with how these are turning out, and I always find Colorwork very enjoyable because I want to see the pattern form. I will say that now that I've done a traditional Fair Isle hat, my Wintry Woods tam, oh my gosh, it's so much easier when you're doing traditional Colorwork because the patterns are much more organic. You can kind of see what's going to happen just by looking at your knitting already, and it's very easy to memorize, so you don't have to look at the chart all the time. Whereas the more modern Colorwork, where it's very designed and very idiosyncratic, you have to look at the chart for every row because, you know, it's not a regular repeating motif. So it's definitely more work. If you're interested in doing stranded Colorwork and you're a little nervous, I would say look for something that's got repeated motifs for your first project, because it will be much easier. It'll be much easier to notice when you're going wrong, and it'll just be easier in general. That would just be my advice. So the final part of the podcast is going to be Knits in the Wild. I really appreciate everyone's feedback. I'm so glad you didn't think that I was vain for putting a bunch of photos of myself on the internet. And so I have a few things to talk about today. I will say when I was transferring the photos to my computer earlier today, I noticed that I was really bad at getting full outfit shots this week, so I apologize. I will work on getting full outfit shots again next week in case that's helpful. So first, since Abby was interested in accessories, I managed to photograph 4 of the accessory and coat combinations that I wore because it was wintry all week, obviously. So first up, I wore a heavy gray trench coat with my Colorwork Wintry Woods hat and then my brown shawl scarf. It's like a shallow crescent to pick up the browns in it. And for mittens, you can't see them in the photo, but I wore the ones I knit out of light gray Cormo yarn, so they picked up colors in the Wintry Woods hat as well. And let's see, the shawl is called A Pinch of Nutmeg, and then those mittens, I can't remember exactly what they were called. But you can always see all my projects on my Ravelry page. Next up, I wore my red coat, and I wore a matching hat and gloves that are out of the Knit Picks Reverie, which is 100% baby alpaca. It's a brushed yarn in Porcini. And then for my neckwear, I wore a cowl, which is also 100% baby alpaca. That's the Juniper Moon Farms Harriet in the sycamore color. And so I was kind of going for a gingerbread look that day, so that's why I went with the browns and the reds. Underneath I had a brown pinafore style dress layered over a red cashmere and wool sweater dress to keep me nice and warm. It was very cold that day. And let's see, then I wore my white coat with my Soaring to Heavens beret, which is the lacy one out of the same Quince & Company Piper in the Abilene colorway that my shawl is made out of. And I wore gloves out of Quince & Company's Turn. They're my only pair of hand knit gloves, and I need to start working on that. In fact, I think instead of casting on a new pair of socks, I'm going to do gloves. because this pair, it was a free pattern, and I really don't like the thumb gusset increases, and they drive me nuts all the time. So I need a replacement. And then for my neckwear, I wore a pashmina style scarf in pink and gray coloring to pick them up. And my final coat accessory combo on a warmer day, I wore a brown and blue tweed light wool coat, and then a matching hat and glove combo out of Quince & Company's Fjord. I think both of those were out of Lark too. Yeah, they were. And those are ones that I designed myself, but you can find the details on my Ravelry page. And I wore my pinch of nutmeg shawl again, because sometimes I like to be matchy-matchy. Okay, on to outfits. First up, I wore my antiquarian scarf, which is my teal scarf that I mentioned as being a little too short. It's fine. I don't mind it being short when I wear it just as outerwear with my coat, but for indoor wear, I'm still working on ways to style it, and so I decided to just wear it like a cowl, and that worked really well. I have a bunch of brooches. I really enjoy wearing brooches. So I just wrapped it around my neck and pinned it with a brooch, as you can see. And I wore it. This was a gray dress that I also wore pinafore style over a long-sleeved gray and white striped t-shirt. You're going to see a lot of gray this week. I really love gray, and I guess I was in a gray mood. Then I also wore my Hearthside cardigan, which is the first sweater that I knit, and it's a burgundy cropped cardigan with a gray silk dress. And it's a long sleeve silk dress because I find that cardigan a little itchy on its own. And this is one of the ones where I apologize, but I do not have a full outfit shot. This was me at my kitchen table. Then I also wore my Melusine cardigan, which is knit out of Quince & Company's Turn, in a design I did myself, with another gray dress. This one was a sleeveless dress, though. And I wore this to the library, and I wanted to take shots since it's Knits in the Wild. I'm like, okay, I'll take some photos. And then I took the photo of me looking at the books, and the shutter was so loud in the quiet library that I totally wimped out, and that's why I don't have a full outfit shot, is because I was too embarrassed. And then by the time I got home, the sun was down. And finally, I do have a full outfit shot of what I wore yesterday, which is my newly sewn skirt. Oh, which I meant to show in finished objects, but that's okay because it's sewn, not knit. So I sewed this skirt. It's a wool polyester blend, which was really difficult to press because of the polyester. I would not buy a polyester blend fabric again. Anyway, and I just used the gathered skirt tutorial on Gertie's blog for better sewing, and then I added some patchwork pockets. It is not at all skillfully done. I did not realize how difficult it would be to add curved pockets, but hey, they're gigantic, they hold a book, and that's what matters to me. And I embroidered, it was my first time doing cross stitch, so I added some little cross stitch decorations to the pockets. I wanted it to look like a homespun apron, basically. So that's why I'm calling it my folk skirt. And I wore that with my new leggings and then my Guernsey-esque jumper, which are both Elsa wool cormo. So head to toe cormo, and I was super cozy. I believe that is everything this week. I'm not actually sure how long this episode is going to run since I've been dealing with battery issues, so hopefully it's not too long and you enjoyed it. I am planning to knit an Aran-style cardigan, and I'm about to begin swatching. I'm very excited about it. I'm going to design it myself. So I've started a thread in my Ravelry group. If you want to share any of your favorite cabled sweaters or even other projects with me, just for visual inspiration, I've been kind of going through Ravelry and that kind of thing. Feel free to do that. I would really appreciate it. And thanks again for everyone who has tuned in and viewed and, given me encouragement in whatever way. I'm still really surprised that so many people want to hear me chat about my knitting, but it's a pleasant surprise. And I feel like now I have the kind of virtual online knitting group that I've been craving, since it's been a little tricky finding similarly minded knitters in my new area. So, until next week. Oh, and I know that in the past I've always recorded on Saturday and then gotten the episode out on Sunday, and that is going to change. So this is going to be the new schedule where I record on Sunday afternoons and then get everything out on Monday. It takes a really long time to upload videos to YouTube, so basically I have to spend the whole night uploading. So, with that administrative note out of the way, I will say goodbye for now, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. And always feel free to share whatever you're working on in the Ravelry group. I love seeing what everyone else is up to. Bye!